This is not motivation. This is not inspiration. This is a warning disguised as remembrance. There is a cycle that does not announce itself. It does not arrive with drama or catastrophe. It repeats quietly, year after year, hidden inside familiar routines, recycled thoughts, and unexamined emotions. Most people never notice it. They wake, they strive, they hope things will change, and somehow nothing truly does. Different dates, different faces, same patterns, same outcomes, same silent question echoing beneath it all. Why does it feel like I'm living the same year again? If you ignore what you're about to hear, the cycle completes itself once more. Not as punishment, not as fate, but as law. Because life does not move forward by time alone. It moves forward by awareness. This script is not here to comfort you. It is here to interrupt the loop. What follows is not advice, but revelation. Not instruction, but exposure. Each chapter reveals a mechanism you've already encountered, yet perhaps never truly seen. You are not stuck. You are repeating, and repetition only ends the moment it is recognized. Listen carefully, because once you see the pattern, you are no longer allowed to pretend you don't. Chapter 1. The Year That Never Ended. Most people believe a year ends when a calendar changes. They celebrate the closing of a chapter with fireworks, countdowns, and declarations of renewal. But the universe does not measure time that way. Time does not reset because numbers change. Time only shifts when consciousness does. This is why, for so many, the year never truly ends. They move from January to December, from birthday to birthday, from season to season, yet something feels eerily unchanged. The same emotional weight resurfaces. The same challenges appear wearing new disguises. The same disappointments repeat with uncanny precision. Different settings, different faces, identical lessons. It feels as though life is pressing replay. This is not coincidence. It is pattern. In a quiet village once stood an old clock tower that locals swore had been broken for decades. Its hands moved. Its bell rang. Yet anyone who lived beneath its shadow noticed something strange. No matter how much time passed, nothing in the village truly evolved. Children grew into adults who repeated their parents' lives. Dreams were spoken with hope and abandoned with familiarity. Every generation believed this would be the year things changed. They were wrong. One winter, a traveler arrived and studied the tower closely. After days of silent observation, he spoke a single sentence to the villagers. "The clock works perfectly. It is the village that is standing still." This is the truth few are willing to face. Time does not trap you. You trap yourself within it. The cycle repeats not because you failed, but because something remains unseen. Life does not punish ignorance. It simply reenacts it. Every unresolved belief, every unexamined fear, every identity you cling to becomes the blueprint for the next iteration of your year. You may change your habits, you may change your goals, you may change your surroundings. But if you do not change the observer living inside those experiences, the year reorganizes itself to look familiar again. This is why progress often feels exhausting. You are moving, but not advancing. Effort increases while outcomes stay strangely proportional. It is like running on a moving walkway going the opposite direction. The faster you run, the more tired you become, yet you remain in the same place. The year that never ended is not a failure of willpower. It is a failure of recognition. In the mountains of the East, monks speak of circular time, the idea that until a lesson is embodied, time curves back on itself, not to torment the soul, but to train it. The universe is not linear, it is recursive. It returns you to the same crossroads until you choose differently. Most people mistake familiarity for fate. They say, "This is just how life is." They say, "This always happens to me." They say, "Maybe next year." But next year cannot arrive while last year is still being lived internally. The year repeats because your inner world has not moved. Your emotional baseline has not shifted. Your identity has not been updated. You are carrying yesterday's self into tomorrow and wondering why tomorrow looks so much like yesterday. This is the hidden mechanism. Time advances, identity remains. Reality follows identity. There was once a man named Elias who kept a journal every year of his life. Each January, he wrote intentions with fierce optimism. Each December, he wrote reflections heavy with disappointment. One evening, while rereading decades of entries, he noticed something unsettling. Different handwriting, different years, same sentences, same frustrations, same hopes written again and again like a spell he couldn't break. He wasn't living New Year's, he was living the same year through different dates. When Elias finally understood this, something inside him stilled. He realized the calendar was innocent. The repetition lived within him. The year was not refusing to end. He was refusing to outgrow it. This is the moment most people avoid, because it is easier to blame time than identity, easier to blame circumstances than consciousness, easier to hope for change than to become it. The universe is patient. It will let you repeat a year for a lifetime if necessary, not out of cruelty, but precision. Until the lesson is integrated, the environment reorganizes itself to present it again, and again, and again. The year that never ended is not a curse. It is an invitation. It asks one question only. Who are you being that keeps choosing the same reality? When that question is answered honestly, not intellectually but viscerally, the year finally loosens its grip. Time straightens. Momentum returns. Life moves forward again, not because you tried harder, but because you became different. Until then, the cycle waits patiently, not outside you, but within. Chapter 2. The Comfort of Familiar Pain. There is a secret the mind rarely admits. It prefers pain it recognizes over freedom it does not understand. This is why cycles persist long after they have outlived their usefulness. This is why people stay in situations that drain them, identities that suffocate them, and narratives that quietly limit them. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering, when familiar, feels safe. The nervous system does not seek happiness, it seeks predictability. And predictability, even when painful, offers the illusion of control. In a desert land once lived a woman named Sarai, who walked the same path every morning to draw water from a distant well. The journey was long, the sun unforgiving, and her body ached from the repetition. One day, a traveler told her of a closer spring hidden beyond unfamiliar terrain. "Why suffer this walk?" he asked, "when water flows nearer?" Sarai shook her head. "I know every stone on this path," she said. "I don't know what waits on the other." So she returned to her suffering, not because it was necessary, but because it was known. This is how familiar pain survives. It dresses itself as practicality, as realism, as responsibility. People say, "At least I know what to expect." They say, "It could be worse." They say, "I don't want to risk disappointment." But what they are really saying is, "I would rather endure what I recognize than face what might transform me." Familiar pain becomes identity. It shapes how you speak, how you move, how you anticipate the world. It becomes the emotional background noise you stop questioning. You don't notice it anymore, until the idea of living without it feels strangely unsettling. This is why healing often feels threatening. To let go of familiar pain is not just to release suffering. It is to release a version of yourself you have learned to navigate the world as. Without it, you must discover who you are beneath the pattern, and that feels like standing without armor. The mind whispers warnings at this threshold. Don't get your hopes up. Stay realistic. This is just how life works. These are not truths. They are protective spells cast by an identity afraid of dissolution. The cycle repeats because pain has become familiar, and familiarity feels like home. In an old monastery, there is a teaching known as the soft chain. Unlike iron shackles, this chain does not restrain the body. It restrains the will. It is woven from habit, belief, and emotional memory. Those bound by it can leave at any time, but rarely do, because the chain has learned their shape. This is how cycles persist without force. You are not held back. You are held in place by what you have normalized. Familiar pain convinces you that transformation requires catastrophe, that unless something dramatic happens, change is impossible. But the truth is quieter and more unsettling. The cycle does not break through violence, it breaks through honesty. You must see the subtle ways you choose what hurts because it feels known, the ways you repeat emotional postures because they feel like you, the ways you reject unfamiliar peace because it lacks reference points. There was a man named Jonah who lived in constant financial strain. Every time opportunity appeared, he hesitated. He questioned it. He delayed. Eventually, it passed. When asked why, he said, "I don't trust things that come easily." He did not realize that struggle had become his compass. Without resistance, he felt lost. This is the cost of familiar pain. It teaches you to distrust ease, to question flow, and to sabotage expansion. The cycle repeats because peace feels foreign, and the nervous system interprets the unfamiliar as danger. But here is the hidden truth. Discomfort does not always mean something is wrong. Sometimes it means something is ending. The unfamiliar is not the enemy. It is the doorway. The year repeats because familiar pain is allowed to stay unchallenged, not confronted, not examined, simply accepted as normal. But nothing that drains your life force is normal. It is simply habitual. The moment you recognize this, the spell weakens. You do not have to fight your patterns. You only have to stop calling them home. The cycle does not end when pain disappears. It ends when pain is no longer preferred. And that shift, quiet, internal, and deeply unsettling, is where time finally begins to move again. Chapter 3. The Invisible Agreement. You renew each January. There is a moment that arrives quietly every year. It does not announce itself with fireworks or countdowns. It does not require celebration or ceremony, and yet it carries more power than any resolution you will ever make. This moment occurs when the old year dissolves into the new, and you step forward carrying the same internal agreements you've always carried. Most people believe a new year offers a clean slate, but nothing resets unless something is released. And most contracts are not written on paper. They are written in belief. An invisible agreement is not something you consciously sign. It is something you accept through repetition. A silent vow made through emotion, identity, and expectation. It lives beneath language, beneath intention, beneath effort. And once formed, it renews itself automatically, unless interrupted by awareness. Each January, people promise themselves change. I'll finally be consistent. This will be my year. Things will be different now. Yet beneath these hopeful declarations, a quieter voice remains untouched. This is how life treats me. This is what I can expect. This is what people do. This is how far I go. That voice holds the contract. The universe does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you have agreed is true. In an ancient city buried beneath sand, archaeologists once uncovered a marketplace where merchants used invisible ink to sign contracts. The terms could only be read under firelight. To the untrained eye, the agreements appeared blank, but when heat was applied, the truth revealed itself unmistakably. Your life works the same way. Pressure reveals agreements. Disappointment exposes clauses. Repetition confirms signatures. If something keeps happening, it is not random. It is contractual. There is an agreement you renew each year about what you deserve, another about how much effort is required, another about how safe it is to be seen, another about how love behaves, another about how success arrives or doesn't. You did not consciously choose these agreements, but you continue to honor them. This is why effort alone cannot override patterns. You can work against a contract for a while, but eventually the fine print reasserts itself. A woman named Lenora once vowed every year to stop abandoning herself in relationships. She read books, she journaled, she set boundaries for a time. But inevitably she found herself shrinking again, compromising again, waiting again. When she finally sat in stillness long enough to listen, she heard the agreement beneath her actions. I am loved when I am needed. I am safe when I am agreeable. I belong when I make myself small. These beliefs were not thoughts, they were terms, and each year, without knowing it, she renewed them. Invisible agreements are powerful because they feel like reality. They masquerade as common sense, as history, as just how things are. They are reinforced by memory and validated by experience, yet experience itself is shaped by them. This is the loop. You do not attract what you want. You reenact what you have agreed to. The most dangerous agreements are not dramatic or extreme. They are subtle and reasonable. I shouldn't expect too much. I need to be realistic. People can't be trusted. Nothing lasts. These sound like wisdom. They are actually permissions for repetition. In the mountains, there is a teaching known as the vow before language. It suggests that before you learn to speak, before you learn to plan, before you learn to hope, you learn to adapt. And adaptation formed agreements about survival, belonging, and worth. Those agreements matured with you. They learned your routines, they learned your fears, they learned how to protect you from perceived danger. But protection has a cost. What once kept you safe may now keep you small. Every January, when you step into a new year without examining these invisible contracts, you are not starting over. You are extending the lease. The universe does not require belief to honor an agreement, only consistency. This is why insight alone does not dissolve cycles. You can understand the pattern intellectually while still honoring it emotionally. And emotion carries more authority than logic in the architecture of reality. The agreement renews itself in silence. Until you interrupt it. Interruption does not come from force. It comes from recognition. You must see the agreement as an agreement, not as truth. You must feel the cost of continuing it, not dramatically, but honestly. And you must consciously choose whether it still serves the life you are becoming. This is not about blame. You did not choose these contracts maliciously. You chose them to survive. But survival is not the same as living. The year repeats not because you failed to change, but because you never renegotiated the terms. And the moment you do, time begins to respond differently. Chapter 4. Why Insight Alone Doesn't Break Cycles. There is a misunderstanding that keeps many intelligent, self-aware people trapped. They believe that if they can just understand the pattern, it will release them. So they analyze, they reflect, they connect dots. They say, "Now I see why this happens." They say, "It makes sense." They say, "I'm aware now." And yet, the cycle continues. Insight feels powerful because it illuminates the mind. But cycles are not maintained by the mind alone. They are held in the body, reinforced by emotion, and protected by identity. Understanding is not transformation, it is orientation. It shows you where you are. It does not automatically move you. This is why some of the most insightful people remain the most stuck. They can explain their patterns in exquisite detail, but still live them. In an old temple, a master once led students through a hall lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflected a different distortion. One stretched the body tall, another wide, another thin. The students laughed and pointed, delighted by their awareness of illusion. Then the master extinguished the lights. In darkness, the distortions vanished, but the students did not move. "You see," the master said, "knowing the mirror lies does not change where you stand. Cycles do not persist because you don't know better. They persist because something in you feels safer staying the same. Insight often threatens identity. When you truly understand a pattern, not intellectually but somatically, you face a choice. Continue being who you've been, or step into unfamiliar territory without guarantees. The nervous system often chooses familiarity over freedom. This is why awareness without embodiment becomes a trap. You know what to do, you know what's happening, but you don't move, because movement requires a loss. To break a cycle, you must grieve the identity that depended on it. There is a version of you that knows how to survive the loop. That version has skills, that version has coping strategies, that version has a story. Letting go of the cycle means letting go of who you were inside it. This is not a small thing. A man named Theo once spent years understanding why he procrastinated. He traced it to fear of judgment, childhood pressure, perfectionism. His insights were accurate and complete. Yet his behavior never changed. One night, exhausted, he admitted something quietly to himself. "If I finish, I'll have to face being seen." In that moment, he realized the cycle wasn't about avoidance. It was about protection. Procrastination wasn't the enemy. It was the guardian of an identity that felt safer unfinished. Insight showed him the door. Emotion kept him inside. Cycles are not broken by information. They are broken by identity shifts. You must become someone for whom the old pattern no longer makes sense. This is why repetition often intensifies after insight. The system senses threat. The pattern tightens its grip. Doubt increases. Fear resurfaces. Old behaviors return with urgency. This is not failure. It is resistance to dissolution. The cycle is fighting for its life. In ancient rites of passage, initiates were not taught new information first. They were stripped of their old roles. Only after identity dissolved was new knowledge given. Because knowledge without transformation only strengthens the existing self, this is the missing step. You do not exit a cycle by thinking your way out. You exit by becoming incompatible with it. This incompatibility is subtle. It looks like choosing differently when no one is watching. It feels like tolerating uncertainty without rushing to soothe it. It sounds like silence where reaction used to live. It is not dramatic, it is decisive. Insight is the map, embodiment is the journey. And embodiment requires repetition, not of thought, but of choice. Small, unfamiliar choices that contradict the old agreement. Choices that feel awkward, choices that feel risky. Choices that don't yet feel like you. This is where most people turn back. They say, this doesn't feel natural. They say, this isn't me. They are right. It isn't the old you. Cycles break when identity changes, not when insight accumulates. The year finally moves forward not when you understand why it repeats, but when you stop behaving as the person who needs it to. And that shift begins not in the mind, but in the quiet courage to act without certainty. That is where time loosens its grip. Chapter 5. The emotional pattern that predicts your next 12 months. Before a single event unfolds, before a single decision is made, before a single opportunity appears, your next year has already been emotionally rehearsed. Most people believe the future is shaped by actions, strategies, or circumstances. But those are secondary effects. The primary architect of time is emotion. Not fleeting emotion, but the dominant emotional pattern you return to when nothing is demanding your attention. This is the emotional climate you live in. It is the feeling you wake up with before the day begins, the undertone beneath your conversations, the atmosphere you carry into rooms without speaking. This emotional pattern predicts your year with unsettling accuracy. Hopeful years are not born from lucky breaks. Heavy years are not born from bad timing. They emerge from emotional consistency. In an old desert city, astrologers once attempted to predict the future by studying stars. But one elder quietly observed people instead. When asked how he could foresee outcomes without charts or calculations, he replied, "I listen to how they feel when they think no one is watching." Emotion is memory in motion. If you consistently feel braced, guarded, tired, or quietly disappointed, the universe does not argue with you. It arranges experiences that match that frequency, not to punish you, but to remain coherent. Reality prefers alignment over intention. This is why you can want change while emotionally expecting repetition, and repetition wins. Expectation is emotion extended into time. There was a woman named Maribel who entered every year with optimism. She made plans, set goals, spoke affirmations. Yet by mid-year, her motivation collapsed into the same quiet resignation. Each December, she asked the same question. Why does this keep happening? One night, instead of planning, she simply sat and listened to herself. Beneath her hopeful words, she felt something else entirely. Fatigue. A deep, unspoken belief that life required endurance more than joy. Her emotional pattern wasn't excitement, it was endurance. So life kept giving her things to endure. The universe does not respond to what you say you want. It responds to what you are emotionally rehearsed for. Emotion is not reaction, it is instruction. The feeling you normalize becomes the instruction manual for your year. If you normalize anxiety, life gives you things to manage. If you normalize lack, life gives you problems to solve. If you normalize fulfillment, life organizes around ease. This is not philosophy, it is pattern recognition. Most people try to change circumstances first, hoping emotion will follow. But emotion precedes event. The emotional baseline is the seed, circumstances are the harvest. In a mountain monastery, Novices were taught to carry bowls of water across a courtyard. Some spilled constantly. Others moved effortlessly. When asked the difference, the teacher explained, "The water responds to how the body expects to move. Your year responds the same way. If you emotionally expect disappointment, you move cautiously. Caution delays opportunity. Delay reinforces belief, and the loop closes. The emotional pattern that predicts your next year is not dramatic. It is quiet and familiar. It lives in phrases like, 'This is just how it goes. I'll deal with it. At least it's manageable.' These are emotional agreements disguised as maturity. But manageability is not fulfillment. When emotion remains unexamined, it becomes destiny. This does not mean you must feel joy constantly. It means you must become aware of what you are most practiced at feeling. The emotion you default to under neutrality is the one that shapes time. To change the year, you do not need new goals. You need a new emotional home, not forced positivity and not denial, but permission to feel something unfamiliar, like calm without vigilance, hope without urgency, presence without tension. This feels unsafe at first, because vigilance once served you, tension once protected you. But protection is not purpose. The year will not change because you demand it. It will change when your emotional climate becomes incompatible with the old pattern. Emotion is the quiet author of time. Change the author, and the story must follow. Chapter 6. Memory as Architecture. Memory is not what you remember. It is what remembers for you. Most people think memory lives in the past. In truth, it lives in the present, quietly shaping perception, decision, and expectation. Memory is not a record of what happened. It is a blueprint for what feels possible. This is why the past repeats itself, not because it insists, but because it has been architected into you. Memory builds corridors. It decides which doors feel familiar, which paths feel safe, which outcomes feel inevitable. You walk these corridors without noticing them. They feel like instinct, like personality, like common sense. But they are design. In an ancient city, builders once discovered that certain structures collapsed repeatedly. Each time they rebuilt, they reinforced the same flawed foundation, stronger materials, better tools, same collapse. Until one architect suggested something radical: remove the foundation entirely. Memory is foundation, and most lives are built on emotional foundations laid before conscious choice existed. This is why certain situations feel magnetic, why you recognize patterns instantly, why some opportunities feel unreal, even when they are real. Your nervous system does not evaluate truth. It evaluates familiarity. Memory teaches it what to expect. If you grew up navigating unpredictability, calm feels suspicious. If you learned to earn love through effort, ease feels undeserved. If safety required vigilance, relaxation feels irresponsible. These are not thoughts. They are structural supports. Memory is architecture because it determines what can be built without collapse. A man named Rowan once found himself sabotaging every stable relationship. He told himself he valued freedom. But when he finally listened deeper, he discovered something else. Stability felt unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity felt dangerous. His memory had designed him for motion, not rest. So rest triggered collapse. The universe does not fight this architecture. It builds on it. It arranges experiences that fit the structure you carry. This is why insight without structural change fails. You can desire a different life, but if the architecture remains, new experiences feel unstable. They fall away. They cannot be held. Memory is not released by remembering more. It is released by creating new emotional experiences repeatedly enough to become structural. This is slow, uncelebrated, invisible at first. In ancient initiation rites, apprentices were not given new teachings immediately. They were placed in unfamiliar environments long enough for the body to adapt. Only after the nervous system stopped bracing was knowledge introduced, because knowledge without safety does not integrate. This is why cycles persist even after awareness. Memory still holds the beams, the walls, the load-bearing beliefs. To change architecture, repetition is required, but of a new kind, not repetition of effort, repetition of regulated experience. Moments where you do not react the old way, moments where you stay present without collapse, moments where nothing bad happens despite unfamiliar calm. Each moment rewrites the blueprint. Memory is conservative. It updates slowly, but it does update. And when it does, the entire structure of reality changes. Suddenly, things that once felt impossible feel neutral. Opportunities feel approachable. Peace no longer triggers suspicion. The year moves differently because the architecture has changed. This is why transformation feels subtle before it feels powerful. The walls shift quietly before the skyline changes. Memory is not your enemy. It was built to protect you, but protection has an expiration date. When you outgrow the structure, it becomes a cage. And the year repeats not because you are trapped, but because you are still living in an old house that no longer fits who you are becoming. The moment you begin renovating, slowly, patiently, compassionately, the cycle begins to loosen. Time follows structure. Change the architecture, and the future rearranges itself without force. Chapter 7. The identity that time can't outrun. There is something time cannot outrun. You can move cities, you can change careers, you can reinvent your routines, your habits, even your relationships. But time cannot outrun identity. Identity is the gravity that bends your future back toward your past. This is why cycles persist even after external change. The environment shifts, but the internal narrator remains, and the narrator always writes the ending it knows. Most people believe identity is who they are. In truth, identity is who they have learned to be consistently. It is not essence, it is repetition. Identity forms when certain behaviors, beliefs, and emotional responses are rehearsed often enough that they begin to feel permanent. Once this happens, time stops being a force of change and becomes a delivery system for familiarity. Time brings you more of you. This is why someone can say, "I've changed," while living the same year in different packaging. The surface evolves, the core remains untouched, and the core is where time takes its instructions. In a coastal town battered by storms, builders once constructed homes on the same narrow strip of land. Every few years, the ocean reclaimed them. Each time, the residents rebuilt stronger walls, higher roofs, sturdier doors, and each time, the sea returned. One old architect finally spoke the truth no one wanted to hear. "You are not fighting the ocean. You are living where it already claims." Identity is location, and time faithfully delivers circumstances that match where you stand internally. The identity time cannot outrun is the one you unconsciously protect. You protect it through justifications, through rationalizations, through the quiet refusal to imagine yourself differently. You say things like, "That's just not who I am. I've always been this way. People like me don't get that." These phrases feel harmless. They are anchors. Every time you repeat them, you reinforce a gravitational field that time must obey. Time does not challenge identity. It confirms it. This is why change that does not include identity feels temporary. You can adopt new habits, but if they contradict your self-concept, they require constant effort. Effort fades, identity remains, and when effort collapses, the old pattern resumes. This is not weakness, it is coherence. The universe values coherence more than aspiration. A man named Calder spent years trying to become confident. He practiced speaking, he studied presence, he mimicked certainty. But inside, his identity still said, "I am someone who must earn permission to exist." So confidence never settled. It visited, but it never moved in. Confidence contradicted identity, and contradictions are unstable. Identity is not changed by force, it is changed by proof. Not proof in theory, but proof in lived experience. The identity that time can't outrun survives because it has evidence. Memory supplies exhibits. Emotion reinforces the verdict. The past testifies constantly. "I tried before. It didn't work. This always happens." These are not complaints, they are identity statements. And time listens carefully. To change identity, you must introduce experiences that the old self cannot explain. This is why transformation often begins with disorientation. You feel unlike yourself. You behave differently. You choose differently. And the mind panics. Who am I becoming? This isn't me. Exactly. That discomfort is not danger, it is dissolution. The old identity is losing jurisdiction. In ancient rites, initiates were stripped of names before entering transformation, not symbolically, but psychologically. Names held identity, identity held destiny. To receive a new future, the old self had to loosen. Modern life offers no such ritual. So people cling to identity even as it limits them, because without it, they feel uncontained. But identity is not containment, it is compression. It compresses infinite potential into a narrow channel of expectation. This is why time feels repetitive. You are living inside a compressed version of yourself. The identity that time can't outrun is not malicious. It once served you. It formed to navigate circumstances that required adaptation. It learned how to survive. And it kept those lessons long after survival ended. You are not wrong for having it, but you are not required to keep it. Time does not demand consistency, identity does. And identity can be renegotiated, but not through affirmations, not through declarations, not through pretending. Identity changes when behavior is repeated without the old emotional justification, when you act differently and do not explain it away, when you choose differently and tolerate the unfamiliar sensations that follow, when you remain present long enough for the nervous system to learn a new normal. This is slow, unglamorous, quiet, but it is permanent. Each time you do something that contradicts the old identity and survive, the gravitational pull weakens. Time begins to stretch forward instead of circling back. The year loosens. You are no longer being pulled into the same ending because the narrator has changed. Time cannot outrun identity, but identity, when gently challenged, eventually steps aside. And when it does, the future finally stops repeating itself. Chapter 8. The Subconscious Calendar. The mind believes time is measured in days. The subconscious knows better. It measures time in emotional anniversaries. This is why certain months feel heavy without explanation, why certain seasons trigger restlessness, sadness, or urgency, why you feel off at the same time each year, even when life is going well. The subconscious keeps a calendar you never see, and it remembers everything. It remembers moments of loss, moments of humiliation, moments when hope collapsed, moments when safety disappeared. These moments become markers. The body remembers before the mind does. Your heart rate shifts, your sleep changes, your focus wavers. You think it's coincidence. It is timing. The subconscious calendar does not care about logic, it cares about association. If something significant happened during a certain emotional state, the body remembers that state and reactivates it when time approaches again. This is why cycles feel inevitable. You are reliving emotional seasons, not chronological ones. In a northern village, elders spoke of the long winter, a period when even during summer, some people felt cold. Their bodies braced for scarcity long after the threat had passed. The winter had ended, the memory had not. The subconscious calendar is built during moments of intensity, trauma, disappointment, betrayal, sudden loss. These events anchor time internally, and unless those anchors are released, the body re-enters them year after year. This is not pathology, it is protection. The subconscious says, last time this happened, pain followed. Be ready. So you brace, and bracing becomes behavior. You pull back, you hesitate, you expect disruption, and expectation creates outcome. This is how the subconscious calendar scripts the future. A woman named Elia noticed that every year around the same month, her motivation collapsed. She blamed burnout, she blamed weather, she blamed herself. But when she finally traced the pattern back, she realized that years earlier, something had ended suddenly during that same season. Her body never forgot. Each year, without warning, it prepared for loss. Not because loss was coming, but because memory said it might. The subconscious does not update through reassurance. It updates through experience. You cannot convince it that the danger is over. You must show it. This is why cycles persist even when circumstances change. The calendar inside you is still active. The subconscious does not measure time by clocks. It measures time by threat resolution. If something never felt completed, never felt integrated, it stays open. And open loops demand reenactment. This is why closure is not an intellectual act. It is a somatic one. The body must experience safety during the season it expects danger. That is how the calendar resets. Until then, each year carries an echo. You think you are responding to the present. You are reacting to the past re-entering through the body. This is why New Year's resolutions fail. They attempt to override a calendar that was never consulted. The subconscious does not recognize January as a reset. It recognizes emotional milestones. If January carries disappointment, it repeats. If March carries abandonment, it reactivates. If autumn carries loss, it prepares again. You cannot will yourself out of this, but you can meet it consciously. When the familiar emotional season approaches, instead of resisting it, you observe it. You stay present. You choose differently, not dramatically, but gently. You show the body that nothing terrible happens when you remain open. This takes courage, because the subconscious will protest. It will create anxiety. It will generate urgency. It will try to push you back into familiar reactions. Not to harm you, but to keep you alive according to outdated data. The subconscious calendar updates when it witnesses contradiction. When I didn't brace, nothing broke. When I stayed present, I survived. When I didn't retreat, I was safe. Each time this happens, the calendar loosens. The season loses its grip, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the year stops repeating itself. This is not about erasing memory. It is about completing it. Time moves forward when the body learns that the past no longer governs the present. The subconscious calendar is not your enemy. It is a reminder. And when listened to, not obeyed, it becomes a guide back into time that finally flows instead of loops. Chapter 9. The loop reinforced by effort. There is a moment when effort stops being a solution and becomes the problem. Most people never notice when they cross this threshold. They only feel the exhaustion that follows, the quiet confusion, the sense that no matter how much they try, something resists them from within reality itself. They assume they are not trying hard enough, but the truth is far more unsettling. The cycle is often reinforced by effort itself. Effort feels virtuous, it feels responsible, it feels like progress. We are taught from childhood that trying harder is the answer to resistance, that persistence conquers all things, that discipline is the cure for stagnation. And in many areas of life, this is true. But cycles do not operate by the rules of linear achievement. A cycle is not a problem to solve, it is a pattern to outgrow. And effort applied to the wrong layer of reality does not dissolve patterns, it stabilizes them. In a valley carved by an ancient river, villagers once tried to stop flooding by stacking stones against the current. Year after year, they built higher walls, stronger barriers, more elaborate defenses, and year after year, the river adapted, pushing harder, finding new routes, breaking through with greater force. Finally, an elder suggested something radical. "Stop fighting the river," he said. "Learn where it wants to go." Cycles behave like rivers. The more force you apply without changing orientation, the more resistance you generate. Effort becomes friction. Friction becomes confirmation. And confirmation tells the subconscious, this is hard, therefore this is real. Effort reinforces identity. When you struggle consistently, you teach yourself who you are. I am someone who has to fight for progress. I am someone who must push through resistance. I am someone for whom ease is suspicious. These beliefs are not thoughts. They are identities forged through repetition, and time obeys identity. This is why cycles often intensify when you get serious about change. You double down, you plan harder, you monitor yourself more closely, you apply discipline like pressure, and suddenly the pattern feels stronger than ever, not because you failed, but because you activated it. The cycle recognizes effort as familiarity. It knows how to survive effort. It was built inside struggle. It learned your rhythms there. It learned how to coexist with force. Effort tells the cycle, I'm still playing on your terms. A man named Julian once committed to changing his life with ruthless discipline. He woke earlier. He optimized his routines. He tracked everything. He forced consistency. For a while, things improved. Then, slowly, almost invisibly, resentment crept in. Fatigue followed. Motivation eroded. Eventually, he collapsed into the very behaviors he tried to escape. When he finally sat in stillness, stripped of ambition, he realized something devastating. I don't know how to live without pushing, he admitted. Pushing was his identity, and the cycle had been built around it. Effort, when rooted in fear, signals lack, not philosophically, but neurologically. The body interprets excessive effort as evidence that something is wrong. It triggers vigilance. Vigilance narrows perception. Narrow perception reinforces old patterns. This is why cycles feel inevitable. You are reinforcing the same internal state while demanding different results. The universe does not reward effort. It responds to coherence. Effort aligned with identity change dissolves cycles. Effort used to override identity entrenches them. The difference is subtle. Aligned effort feels calm. Misaligned effort feels urgent. Aligned effort emerges from clarity. Misaligned effort emerges from fear. Aligned effort does not need to announce itself. Misaligned effort constantly proves itself. In monasteries that taught deep transformation, novices were forbidden from trying during certain practices. Not because effort was bad, but because effort interfered with awareness. The goal was not to force change, but to observe what resisted change. Resistance reveals where identity still holds power. The moment you notice yourself trying desperately to escape a pattern, pause. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I stop pushing? The answer reveals the identity you are protecting. Cycles end not when effort increases, but when effort becomes unnecessary. This does not mean passivity. It means precision. It means placing effort where it creates new experience, not where it repeats old struggle. The cycle is not impressed by how hard you try. It dissolves when it no longer recognizes you. Chapter 10. The False Reset of New Beginnings. There is a ritual the modern world performs with great enthusiasm. It is called the fresh start. New year, new job, new relationship, new city, new routine. The promise is intoxicating. This time will be different. This time you will do it right. This time the past will not follow you. And for a moment it feels true. Energy rises. Hope returns. Possibility feels near. Then, slowly, quietly, the familiar returns. The same doubts, the same reactions, the same endings. People call this bad luck. It is not. It is the false reset. A reset that changes the scene without changing the self. Beginnings do not break cycles. They expose them. A new beginning removes external context, but leaves internal architecture untouched. And architecture determines outcome. In an ancient tale, a king ordered his court magician to erase his kingdom's troubles by moving the capital to new land. The city was rebuilt with grandeur. The people celebrated. And within years, the same conflicts emerged, different streets, same suffering. The magician spoke gently. You moved the body, not the soul. This is the secret of the false reset. You can change your environment completely and still wake up inside the same internal landscape. The false reset is seductive because it offers hope without responsibility. It suggests that change can happen without confronting identity, memory, or emotional pattern. It promises renewal without reckoning. But the universe does not work that way. New beginnings amplify what already exists within you. If clarity exists, it expands. If confusion exists, it multiplies. If avoidance exists, it follows you faithfully. This is why people repeat relationships across different partners, why the same conflict appears in new workplaces, why emotional themes persist across cities and years. You did not fail the fresh start. The fresh start revealed what remained unresolved. A woman named Hannah left her hometown believing it held her back. New city, new friends, new career. For a time, she thrived. Then slowly, the same sense of disconnection emerged. She blamed the city, then herself. Only later did she realize the truth. She had never learned to feel safe belonging, so no place felt like home. Beginnings do not create identity. Identity determines how beginnings unfold. This is why cycles often restart after major life changes. The nervous system interprets novelty as threat. Old coping mechanisms activate. The subconscious reasserts familiar roles. The reset was external. The pattern was internal. The most dangerous belief is that change requires escape. Escape delays confrontation, and confrontation is where cycles end. True resets are not loud. They are internal. They occur when you choose differently in a familiar situation. when you respond instead of react, when you remain present instead of fleeing. These moments do not feel like new beginnings. They feel like quiet deviations. The false reset says, "This time, everything will change." The true reset says, "This time I will," not through force, not through reinvention, but through presence. In ancient teachings, initiates were warned against dramatic transformation, not because it was impossible, but because it often bypassed integration. Instead, they were instructed to stay where they were and act differently. "Remain," the elders said, "until the place no longer recognizes you." That is the real reset, when the environment stays the same, but you do not. The cycle does not break when you leave, it breaks when you outgrow. The false reset postpones growth by outsourcing it to circumstance. The true reset accepts that circumstance is not the cause, but the mirror. You do not need a new beginning. You need a new way of being inside the beginning you already have. And when that shift occurs, quietly, internally, the universe responds with genuine renewal. Not because you demanded it, but because you finally became someone for whom the old cycle no longer made sense. Chapter 11. Awareness as interruption. There is a moment so small it is often missed. It does not arrive with clarity or certainty. It does not announce itself as transformation. It does not feel powerful. It feels like a pause, a breath where reaction does not immediately follow stimulus, a fraction of a second where the familiar response hesitates, a quiet opening where the old pattern loosens its grip. This moment is awareness, and awareness is the only true interruption of a cycle. Most people believe cycles are broken by decisive action, by courage, by radical change. But cycles do not collapse under force. They collapse under seeing. Not seeing intellectually, not seeing conceptually, but seeing in the body. Awareness is not a thought. It is a state. It is the moment you notice what is happening while it is happening, before identity rushes in to explain, justify, or repeat. This is why awareness feels fragile, because it appears before certainty returns. In an ancient city, there was a bell that rang once a day at an unpredictable hour. Citizens were told that whoever heard the bell and remained still until the echo faded would be freed from one old habit forever. Many heard the bell. Few remained still. Most reacted immediately, checking the time, talking, moving, thinking. The habit stayed. Awareness asks for stillness where reaction has always lived. The cycle survives because reaction is automatic. Awareness introduces choice. This is the interruption. You notice the urge to explain yourself. You notice the impulse to withdraw. You notice the tension before you push, and instead of obeying, you stay. That staying rewires time. The nervous system expects completion through action. When action does not arrive, it becomes curious. Curiosity softens identity. Identity loosens. The cycle pauses. This is why awareness feels uncomfortable. It leaves the pattern unfinished. A woman named Corinne noticed that every time she felt misunderstood, she rushed to clarify, defend, and over-explain. One day, mid-sentence, she stopped. She felt exposed, unanchored, silent. Nothing terrible happened. That moment changed her year. Awareness did not fix her life. It interrupted her loop. And interruption is enough. Cycles depend on momentum. Awareness removes momentum without confrontation. This is why practices that cultivate awareness, meditation, journaling, reflection, work only when they touch the moment of activation. Outside that moment, awareness becomes analysis. Inside it, awareness becomes liberation. You cannot interrupt a cycle from the outside. You must catch it as it begins. This requires presence. Presence is not calm. Presence is attentiveness. It is noticing the sensation before the story, the feeling before the meaning, the impulse before the identity. When you notice early the cycle has no foundation, the universe does not punish interruption. It reorganizes around it. Time responds immediately. The day unfolds differently. The interaction shifts. The outcome diverges, not dramatically but unmistakably. Awareness is the smallest lever with the largest consequence, and once you recognize this, you stop searching for breakthroughs. You start listening for pauses, because every cycle has a doorway, and awareness is how you see it. Chapter 12. The pause between reaction and pattern. Between what happens to you and what you do about it, there is a space. Most people live as though this space does not exist. They react immediately. They respond reflexively. They repeat instinctively. And because of this, the pattern completes itself without resistance. The pause is not taught. It is not celebrated. It is not rewarded, but it is everything. The pause is where the future changes. Reaction is the past acting through you. The pause is the present reclaiming authority. When you pause, you interrupt the handoff between memory and behavior. You prevent the old identity from taking the wheel. You create a gap where something new can enter. This gap is uncomfortable. The body wants resolution. The mind wants certainty. Identity wants continuity. The pause denies all three. That is why it works. In a monastery high in the mountains, students were trained to pause before speaking. At first, conversations felt awkward, delayed, stilted. Over time, something changed. Words became fewer, truer. Conflicts dissolved before forming. The pause removed inevitability. This is how cycles break, not through heroic action, but through delayed reaction. A man named Thomas noticed that every time he felt rejected, he immediately disengaged. He told himself it was dignity. In truth, it was protection. One evening, when the familiar sting arose, he paused. He did nothing. He felt everything. The urge passed. Connection remained. That pause rewrote his relational future. The pause is not passive, and it is active restraint. It says, I will not let the past decide for me. When you pause, you feel exposed. Because the pattern no longer shields you. You are present without armor. This presence is powerful because it is unfiltered. The universe responds to presence with clarity. Options appear, choices widen, outcomes soften. Not because you forced them, but because you stopped forcing completion. The pause reveals something startling. You are not your reaction. Reaction is learned. Pattern is inherited. Presence is innate. The pause allows presence to speak. This is why the pause feels like silence after noise, like space after compression, like standing upright after years of bracing. It is unfamiliar. It is quiet. It is free. Every cycle depends on speed. Slow it down, and it cannot sustain itself. The pause slows time. It gives you back authorship. You no longer rush toward the ending you know. You remain long enough to discover a different one. The pause is not a technique. It is a devotion to not abandoning yourself for familiarity. Each pause weakens the old pattern. Each pause strengthens a new self. Over time, the pause becomes natural. Reaction loses urgency. Patterns lose grip. Identity reshapes quietly. And the year stops repeating, not because you tried harder, but because you waited longer. That waiting is not hesitation, it is wisdom. The pause is the birthplace of choice, and choice is the end of the cycle. Chapter 13. The Cost of Staying Familiar. There is a cost that is rarely calculated. It does not appear on bills or bank statements. It does not announce itself through crisis or catastrophe. It accumulates quietly, invisibly over time. It is the cost of staying familiar. Most people assume that familiarity is neutral, comfortable, safe. They believe that staying within what is known may limit growth, but at least it prevents loss. They imagine that remaining the same is a kind of stability. This is an illusion. Familiarity always extracts payment. It simply charges slowly. The cost is paid in vitality, in imagination, in presence. Every time you choose the familiar response instead of the truthful one, something subtle dims. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough that you barely notice, until one day you realize life feels smaller than it used to. This is how cycles quietly impoverish the soul. In a forgotten kingdom, there was a bridge that crossed a deep gorge. The bridge was old, narrow, and unstable, but it was known. Travelers used it for generations. One day, a new bridge was built, wider, stronger, safer, yet many refused to cross it. This bridge has always carried us, they said. It's dangerous to trust something new. Years later, when the old bridge collapsed, the villagers were shocked. They had mistaken longevity for reliability. Familiarity is not safety. It is repetition. The cost of staying familiar is not always obvious. It does not always show up as failure. Often it shows up as almost fulfilled, almost aligned, almost content. Almost is expensive. Almost costs you the life you could have lived. The familiar self is efficient. It knows how to navigate disappointment. It knows how to lower expectations just enough to avoid heartbreak. It knows how to endure. It knows how to cope. But endurance is not expansion. When you stay familiar, you keep paying for skills you no longer need. You keep maintaining defenses for threats that no longer exist. You keep rehearsing survival in a life that is asking you to live. The cycle repeats because the familiar self is rewarded, not by joy, but by predictability. Predictability feels like control. Control feels like safety. Safety feels like survival. But survival is not the goal of consciousness. It is the starting point. There was a woman named Leora who prided herself on resilience. She had survived loss, hardship, disappointment. She knew how to get through anything. And because of this, she kept getting things to get through. Her resilience became her identity. Her identity became her limit. She did not realize that the cost of staying familiar was that life never asked her to receive, only to endure. Familiarity keeps you busy. It gives you problems you know how to solve. It gives you emotions you know how to manage. It gives you relationships that confirm who you believe you are. But it also quietly steals curiosity. Curiosity is dangerous to cycles. Curiosity asks, what if this could be different? Familiarity answers, don't risk it. Each time familiarity wins, curiosity weakens. And without curiosity, time stagnates. The cost of staying familiar is not just what you experience, it is what you never experience. The conversations you never have, the paths you never walk, the versions of yourself you never meet. These losses do not announce themselves, they leave no evidence. They cannot be mourned because they never fully existed, but they are felt. As restlessness, as quiet dissatisfaction, as the sense that something is missing, but you cannot name what. This is the bill arriving. In ancient traditions, elders warned that the greatest danger was not suffering, but stagnation. Suffering forced movement. Stagnation preserved illusion. Those who suffered eventually changed. Those who stayed comfortable remained asleep. Comfort is not ease, comfort is familiarity without truth. Ease expands, comfort contains. The cycle does not persist because you are weak. It persists because it offers familiarity at the price of possibility. And possibility feels risky. The moment you consider stepping beyond the familiar, the mind produces objections. Logical ones, reasonable ones. It reminds you of past pain. It warns you of potential loss. It frames staying the same as wisdom. But wisdom does not fear growth. It respects it. The true cost of staying familiar is that eventually familiarity stops feeling safe and starts feeling suffocating. The walls close in. The same solutions stop working. The same routines feel heavier. This is when people panic. They think something has gone wrong. Nothing has gone wrong. The familiar has simply expired. The cost has been paid long enough. The cycle offers one last comfort at this stage: resignation. This is just how life is. At least I know what to expect. I should be grateful. Gratitude is not meant to anesthetize longing. Longing is not ingratitude, it is direction. When longing arises, it is not asking you to abandon your life. It is asking you to outgrow your familiarity with limitation. The cycle breaks when the cost of staying familiar becomes greater than the fear of stepping into the unknown. This is not rebellion. It is maturation. And once this threshold is crossed, the familiar loses its power, not because it is rejected, but because it is no longer convincing. You see it clearly. You thank it for what it once provided, and you choose differently. The cost is paid one final time, and the future opens. Chapter 14. The signal you've been ignoring. Before a cycle completes itself again, it sends a signal. It does not shout. It does not threaten. It does not demand. It whispers. Most people hear this whisper and dismiss it. They call it intuition, restlessness, boredom, dissatisfaction, fatigue. They label it stress or burnout or a passing mood. They medicate it with distraction, productivity, or reassurance, and then the cycle closes. Again, the signal is subtle because it must be. If it were loud, it would force change. And forced change does not integrate. The signal exists to invite awareness, not override choice. It appears as a feeling you cannot shake, a question you keep returning to, a quiet discomfort that does not resolve. This is not a problem. It is guidance. The signal arises when the current version of you has reached its limit. When identity, memory, and emotional pattern can no longer sustain expansion. When the old structure begins to creak under the pressure of growth, the signal says, "This way of being has taken you as far as it can." But the mind does not like this message. The mind prefers fixes, adjustments, optimizations. It would rather tweak the cycle than end it. So it looks for ways to silence the signal. Just push through. Don't overthink. Everyone feels like this sometimes. These phrases are not reassurance. They are suppression. The signal does not go away when ignored. It becomes background noise, and background noise eventually becomes normal. In a coastal town, sailors once ignored a faint change in wind direction. It was subtle, barely noticeable. They had sailed these waters for years. They trusted familiarity. Hours later, a storm arrived without warning. The signal had been there, but it was dismissed. Cycles do not repeat suddenly. They complete themselves gradually. The signal is the last invitation before repetition becomes inevitable. It appears when you hesitate before responding the old way, when a familiar choice feels heavier than it used to, when you imagine continuing as you are and feel a quiet grief. This grief is not depression, it is foresight. It is the soul glimpsing the cost of another year lived the same way. The signal does not tell you what to do. It tells you that what you have been doing no longer fits. A man named Oren felt this signal every Sunday evening. A heaviness settled in his chest. He told himself it was dread of the work week, but even when his job changed, the feeling remained. Eventually, he realized the signal wasn't about work. It was about waiting. Waiting for permission, waiting for certainty, waiting to feel ready. His life had become a holding pattern. The signal was asking him to land. Signals are often misinterpreted as negativity. But negativity has a sharp edge. The signal is soft, it does not attack, and it nudges. It appears in moments of stillness, in pauses, in the quiet after distraction fades. It does not interrupt noise, it waits for silence. This is why so many people stay busy. Busyness is not ambition, it is avoidance. Avoidance of the signal. Because the signal asks a dangerous question. What if you stopped preparing and started living? That question destabilizes identity, so it is ignored. But ignored signals do not disappear. They move deeper. They show up as physical symptoms, emotional numbness, loss of meaning, quiet resentment. Eventually, the cycle tightens. The signal was meant to soften the transition. When ignored, the transition becomes harsher. This is not punishment. It is physics. Energy that does not flow stagnates. Stagnation demands release. The signal is release offered gently. In ancient teachings, it was said that the soul knocks 3 times before changing the locks. The first knock is curiosity. The second is discomfort. The third is disruption. Most people wait for the third. But the third is loud. The cycle repeats because the signal was ignored at the whisper stage. Listening does not require action. It requires honesty. You do not have to know what comes next. You only have to admit that what is no longer enough. This admission is powerful. It breaks denial, it dissolves resignation, and it restores choice. The signal is not asking you to abandon your life. It is asking you to inhabit it more fully, to stop performing, to stop bracing, to stop postponing. The moment you acknowledge the signal, not analyze it, not fix it, not silence it, something shifts. Time slows, pressure eases, the future opens slightly, enough to step. The signal you've been ignoring is not a warning of failure. It is an invitation to maturity, and when accepted, the cycle does not need to repeat, because it has finally been heard. Chapter 15. Why resistance is not the enemy. There is a moment in every cycle when resistance rises. It does not arrive politely. It does not ask permission. It announces itself through tension, avoidance, irritation, fatigue, and doubt. Most people misunderstand this moment completely. They believe resistance is proof they are doing something wrong, that they have chosen the wrong path, that something is misaligned, unsafe, or destined to fail. They treat resistance as a warning sign and immediately retreat back into what is familiar. And in doing so, they unknowingly reset the cycle. This is one of the most subtle traps of repetition. Resistance is not the enemy. Resistance is the signal that the cycle is weakening. Resistance appears when an old identity is being challenged, when memory loses authority, when familiar emotional patterns no longer fully control your behavior. The system protests, not because you are in danger, but because it is losing relevance. Resistance is the sound of the past arguing for its survival. In an ancient forest, there was a species of tree whose roots wrapped tightly around stones as it grew. Over decades, the roots fused with the rock, drawing stability from its solidity. One year, an earthquake cracked the stone beneath the tree. As the roots loosened, the tree shook violently. To an observer, it looked as though the tree were dying. In truth, it was being freed. The resistance was not collapse. It was separation. This is how resistance functions in your life. When you begin to move beyond a cycle, when you pause instead of react, when you choose presence instead of avoidance, when you stop reinforcing the familiar, the nervous system responds with alarm. It sends signals designed to pull you back into old behaviors. Fear increases. Urgency appears, doubt sharpens, not because the new path is wrong, but because the old path is dissolving. The mind interprets unfamiliarity as threat. It does not distinguish between danger and novelty. So when you stop doing what you've always done, the mind produces resistance to restore predictability. This is why resistance feels personal. It speaks in your own voice. You're overthinking. This isn't realistic. You're going to regret this. Why make things harder than they need to be? Resistance is not external opposition. It is internal loyalty to an expired self. Most people obey resistance immediately. They back away. They rationalize retreat. They say, "I'll come back to this later." And later never arrives, because the cycle has regained momentum. But those who break cycles learn something crucial. They stop arguing with resistance. They stop trying to defeat it, suppress it, or overcome it. They recognize it as a signpost rather than an obstacle. They understand that resistance marks the exact boundary between who they have been and who they are becoming. Resistance always guards the threshold. In initiation rites across cultures, there is always a guardian, a test, a moment of fear or doubt that tempts the initiate to turn back. Not because the path is wrong, but because the old self is not permitted to pass. Resistance asks one question only: are you willing to proceed without certainty? The cycle survives because most people require guarantees before they move. They want proof that change will be safe, successful, and comfortable. But proof only arrives after the threshold is crossed. This is the paradox. Resistance cannot be resolved by thinking. It must be met with presence. When resistance arises, the invitation is not to act or retreat, but to stay. Stay with the sensation, stay with the uncertainty, stay without explanation. This staying confuses the pattern. The old cycle expects one of two outcomes: compliance or escape. When neither arrives, it loses coherence. The nervous system recalibrates. The emotional charge weakens. This is how resistance transforms from enemy to teacher. A woman named Amara noticed resistance every time she was about to speak honestly. Her chest tightened, her throat closed, her mind flooded with reasons to stay silent. For years, she obeyed the resistance and preserved harmony at the cost of truth. One day, instead of forcing herself to speak or choosing silence, she paused. She felt the resistance fully, without acting on it. The urge passed, and when she finally spoke, her words were calm, not reactive. That pause ended a cycle that had shaped her entire life. Resistance does not disappear when you move forward. It changes form. At first, it feels loud and convincing. Over time, it becomes quieter, less urgent, more transparent. Eventually, it appears not as an obstacle, but as a checkpoint. Each time resistance appears and you remain present, you build a new internal reference. I felt fear, and nothing bad happened. I didn't retreat, and I survived. I stayed, and the moment passed. These references rewrite identity. The nervous system learns that safety does not require repetition. Memory loosens. The subconscious calendar updates. Time begins to move forward again. This is why resistance often intensifies just before a cycle breaks. The old pattern is making a final appeal. It is offering familiar pain in exchange for predictability. Do not confuse intensity with importance. The strongest resistance often protects the smallest remaining piece of the old self. Resistance does not mean stop. It means pay attention. It is pointing directly at the edge of transformation. When you stop treating resistance as an enemy, you stop fighting yourself. You realize that nothing within you is sabotaging your growth. Everything is attempting to keep you safe using outdated information. Your task is not to eliminate resistance, but to outgrow its authority. Stand at the threshold, feel the pull backward. Do not obey it. Let resistance rise and fall like a wave. On the other side of that wave is not chaos, it is clarity. And once you cross that threshold enough times, resistance stops appearing as fear and begins appearing as confirmation. Confirmation that the cycle is ending. Chapter 16. The identity that ends the cycle. There comes a moment when effort stops, resistance quiets, and something deeper is asked of you. Not action, not strategy, not courage in the way you once understood it. You are asked to let an identity die. This is the moment the cycle truly ends. Until now, everything has been preparation. Awareness has interrupted momentum. The pause has slowed reaction. Resistance has revealed the threshold, but none of these alone dissolve the loop permanently. They weaken it. They loosen it. They make escape possible. The cycle ends only when the identity that required it no longer exists. This is not metaphor. Cycles do not repeat because circumstances recur. They repeat because a self recurs, the same emotional posture, the same expectations, the same interpretation of reality. As long as that self remains intact, time reorganizes itself to meet it. This is why people say, no matter where I go, there I am. They are not being poetic. They are describing identity gravity. Identity is not who you are in essence. Identity is who you believe you must be to survive, belong, or matter. And every cycle is loyal to that belief. In an ancient city long buried beneath layers of stone, there was a rite reserved only for those who wished to leave a repeating fate. The initiate was led into a chamber with no mirrors, no symbols, no instructions. They were told only this: remain until the one who entered no longer feels necessary. Some stayed hours, some stayed days, some fled. Those who remained described the same experience. First came restlessness, then fear, then boredom, then grief, and finally, a strange emptiness that felt neither good nor bad, just open. They did not leave as heroes. They left as something quieter, unburdened. This is what it means for an identity to end. It does not collapse dramatically. It dissolves. The identity that ends the cycle is not replaced by a better version. There is no upgraded personality waiting on the other side. There is simply less compression, less defense, less story. You become less someone, and in that lessness, life gains room to move. This terrifies the mind. The mind equates identity with existence. It believes that without a familiar narrative, without a role, without a predictable way of being, you will disappear. It produces panic at the thought of not knowing who you are. But essence does not require identity. Essence existed before identity formed. Identity was added to navigate a world that once felt overwhelming. It is not who you are, it is what you learned. The identity that ends the cycle is the one that no longer needs repetition to feel real. For some, this is the identity of the struggler. For others, the caretaker, the achiever, the invisible one, the resilient one, the one who is always almost there. Each identity has a payoff. Struggle provides meaning, caretaking provides belonging, achievement provides worth, invisibility provides safety, resilience provides pride. Cycles exist to keep these payoffs alive. Ending the cycle means relinquishing the payoff. This is the real cost. Not losing the familiar pain, but losing the familiar reward hidden inside it. A man named Elias lived his entire life as the reliable one, the one who held everything together, the one who never fell apart. People depended on him. He was respected, he was needed, and he was exhausted. When he finally stopped stepping in, stopped fixing, stopped rescuing, something terrifying happened. Nothing collapsed. People adapted. Life continued. And Elias felt unnecessary. That feeling was the death of an identity and the birth of freedom. The identity that ends the cycle is the one that no longer asks life to confirm it, no longer needs to be right, needed, admired, pitied, proven, or protected. This does not mean you lose your qualities. You lose your attachment to them. You are still capable, still kind, still intelligent, still strong, but you are no longer organized around those traits as survival strategies. This is why the end of a cycle often feels anticlimactic. There is no celebration, no fireworks, no announcement, just a quiet sense that something no longer pulls you. Situations that once hooked you now feel flat. Triggers lose their charge. Old temptations feel oddly irrelevant. You don't feel victorious, you feel neutral. And neutrality is power, because neutrality means choice has returned. The identity that ends the cycle is not built, it is released. This release often happens gradually, through moments where you do not reinforce the old self, where you allow yourself to be misunderstood, where you stop explaining, where you do not rush to re-establish who you are. These moments feel exposed. Because without identity, there is no script, but there is presence. Presence does not need repetition. Presence meets life as it is, not as it was. And life responds immediately. Time stretches forward, possibility opens. The year feels unfamiliar. This unfamiliarity is not chaos, it is openness. When the identity dissolves, the cycle has nothing to attach to. It cannot repeat without a self to repeat through. This is why some people wake up one day and realize the old problem simply isn't there anymore. Not resolved, not fixed, just irrelevant. The cycle didn't break because they defeated it. It broke because they outgrew the identity that required it. This is the true ending. Not effort, not mastery, and not perfection, but release. The moment you stop needing the cycle to define you, it lets you go. And what remains is not emptiness. What remains is space. And in that space, a different kind of life begins. Not louder, not more impressive, but finally, forward. Chapter 17. The decision that time cannot undo. There is a decision that does not feel like a decision. It does not arrive with certainty. It does not feel dramatic or bold. It is not accompanied by confidence or clarity. It feels quiet, almost ordinary. And yet, once made, time can no longer return you to where you were. This is the decision that ends the cycle permanently. Until now, you have interrupted patterns, paused reactions, stayed with resistance, and loosened identity. These shifts weakened the loop. They slowed it. They made space. But the cycle can still reassemble itself if the final decision is not made. This decision is not about what you will do. It is about what you will no longer do to yourself. Most people imagine transformation as an addition, a new habit, a new belief, a new way of thinking. But the decision that time cannot undo is always subtractive. You stop abandoning yourself, not occasionally, not conditionally, but fundamentally. This decision does not announce itself as self-love. It does not feel poetic or empowering. It feels sober, grounded, unavoidable. It sounds like this: I will no longer participate in my own diminishment. Once this decision is made, not declared, not promised, but embodied, time rearranges itself around you. Because time does not test intention, it tests consistency. The cycle survives on negotiation, on just this once, on exceptions, on postponements, on self-betrayals that feel reasonable in the moment. The decision that time cannot undo ends negotiation. There was a man named Rowan who lived in perpetual hesitation. Every opportunity came with a cost, and he always chose the option that kept him safest emotionally, even when it cost him growth. One evening, after repeating the same internal argument for years, he said something quietly that changed everything. I am done arguing with myself. That was it. He did not know what he would do next. He did not feel brave and he did not feel ready, but he stopped renegotiating his own worth. The next time the familiar pattern appeared, the urge to retreat, to delay, to rationalize, something was different. The argument never started. The decision had already been made. This is how the cycle ends, not through force, through finality. The decision that time cannot undo is not loud because it does not need reinforcement. It does not depend on motivation or emotion. It is not renewed daily. It is simply lived. It shows up in moments that seem insignificant. You speak when you would have stayed silent. You rest when you would have pushed. You leave when you would have endured. You stay when you would have escaped. Each choice looks small. Together they are irreversible. This decision does not guarantee ease. It guarantees alignment. Alignment does not remove difficulty. It removes self-betrayal. And without self-betrayal, cycles lose their fuel. The mind will test this decision. It will ask, "Are you sure? Isn't this selfish? What if this costs you something?" These questions are not warnings. They are echoes of the old identity. The decision does not respond. It simply stands. In ancient texts, this moment was called the sealing, not because something was closed, but because something was no longer revisited. The initiate was said to have crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, not because retreat was impossible, but because it no longer made sense. This is why the decision feels subtle. It is not fueled by emotion, it is fueled by recognition. You recognize that returning to the old way would cost more than moving forward, and that recognition cannot be unseen. Time respects this. Opportunities shift. People respond differently. Situations reorganize, not magically but coherently. The universe aligns with decisions that are no longer negotiable. This is why some changes feel sudden after long periods of stagnation. The decision was made internally long before circumstances caught up. Once the decision is embodied, the cycle does not attempt to return. There is nothing to attach to. The hooks find no surface. You are not stronger, you are clearer, and clarity ends repetition. The decision that time cannot undo is not heroic, it is honest, and honesty is irreversible, because once you stop lying to yourself about what you are willing to tolerate, time has no way to take you back. You move forward not because you are certain, but because you are finished pretending. That is the decision, and once made, the year does not repeat, it unfolds. Chapter 18. Living without the old narrative. When the cycle ends, there is no applause. No announcement echoes through your life declaring that you are free. No moment arrives where you feel suddenly transformed, enlightened, or complete. The ending of a cycle is not marked by drama. It is marked by absence. The old narrative simply stops speaking. At first, this silence is unsettling. You are used to a constant internal commentary, explaining, justifying, anticipating, preparing. You are used to rehearsing what might go wrong, how you should respond, who you need to be. The narrative once served a purpose. It helped you survive, adapt, belong, and now it is gone. Living without the old narrative feels like standing in a familiar room after the furniture has been removed. The space is larger than you expected. The echoes are strange. You keep reaching for something that is no longer there. This is not emptiness, it is unoccupied presence. Most people assume that when a cycle ends, clarity rushes in to replace it. But clarity is not the first visitor. The first visitor is neutrality, a quiet, almost blank sense of being that feels neither good nor bad. This neutrality is often misread as loss. You may think, "Why don't I feel excited?" You may wonder, "Why don't I feel relieved?" You may even worry that something is wrong. Nothing is wrong. You are simply no longer narrating yourself into existence. The old narrative was loud because it had to be. It needed to convince you to keep playing the same role. It needed to justify repetition. It needed to keep you oriented toward the past. Without it, you experience moments that feel oddly unfinished. Situations arise where you would normally react, and you don't. Conversations unfold without the familiar internal script telling you how to perform. Decisions appear without the usual urgency to get them right. This can feel disorienting, but disorientation is not danger. It is recalibration. In ancient accounts, those who completed initiation were warned about this phase. They were told not to rush to replace the old identity with a new one, not to immediately define themselves again, not to fill the silence too quickly. "Let the dust settle," the elders said. "The ground is changing shape." Living without the old narrative requires restraint. You must resist the temptation to explain yourself, especially to yourself. The mind wants a story. It wants to know who you are now. It wants labels, plans, and meaning. But if you rush to construct a new narrative, you risk rebuilding the same structure under a different name. The cycle does not return because circumstances repeat. It returns because identity reasserts itself. So for a time you live without definition. This is not stagnation. It is incubation. A woman named Celine described this phase as walking without gravity. For years she had defined herself through struggle, always improving, always healing, always fixing. When the cycle ended, she no longer knew how to measure her days. "I don't know who I am without the problem," she admitted. This admission frightened her, but something else happened. Without the problem, her days became quieter. She noticed details she had rushed past before. She felt emotions without immediately categorizing them. She rested without guilt. She spoke without calculating impact. Life began to meet her differently, not more intensely, more honestly. Living without the old narrative does not make life perfect. It makes life direct. You no longer filter experience through expectation. You no longer interpret every event as confirmation or threat. You meet moments as they are, not as evidence for a story. This is why life can feel strangely simple after a cycle ends. Simple does not mean easy. It means unlayered. When something hurts, it hurts, without becoming identity. When something goes well, it goes well, without becoming pressure. When uncertainty appears, it is felt, without spiraling into fear. You respond instead of react. And response is always present. The absence of the old narrative also changes how time feels. Days no longer feel like rehearsals for the future or recoveries from the past. They feel self-contained, whole, complete in themselves. This can be unsettling if you are used to chasing or bracing. You may catch yourself wondering, shouldn't I be doing more? Or, am I wasting time? These thoughts are echoes. They belong to the old narrative that equated worth with motion, tension, and effort. Living without that narrative teaches you something radical. Nothing needs to be earned in order to be lived. This realization does not arrive as belief. It arrives as experience. You notice that nothing collapses when you stop performing. That relationships do not vanish when you stop overfunctioning. That opportunities do not disappear when you stop chasing. In fact, something else happens. Life approaches you, not aggressively, not dramatically, gently. Opportunities appear without pressure. Conversations deepen without strategy. Decisions arise without urgency. You are not pulled into them. You are invited. This is unfamiliar territory for most people. They mistake invitation for stagnation. But invitation requires presence. It cannot be forced. Living without the old narrative means learning to wait without anxiety. This is not passive waiting. It is attentive stillness. You stay receptive instead of reactive. You allow meaning to emerge instead of assigning it prematurely. You let life show you who you are becoming instead of deciding in advance. This phase feels fragile because it is undefended. Without a narrative, you cannot hide behind explanation. You cannot justify behavior with old stories. You must feel directly. And feeling directly is vulnerable. But vulnerability here is not exposure to harm. It is exposure to truth. Truth does not attack. It clarifies. As weeks and months pass, something subtle occurs. A new orientation forms, not as a story but as a posture. You begin to trust yourself without needing guarantees. You begin to act without rehearsing outcomes. You begin to say yes and no without over-explaining. This is the emergence of a new self, not constructed but revealed. The new self does not announce itself. It does not replace the old identity with another role. It remains flexible, responsive, and present. This is why the cycle cannot return. There is nothing rigid to hook into. The cycle requires predictable reactions, familiar fears, rehearsed meanings. Without the old narrative, these are unavailable. You are no longer legible to the past. Living without the old narrative does not mean you forget who you were. It means who you were no longer defines who you must be. Memory becomes reference, not instruction. The past informs you, but it does not command you. This is the difference between experience and identity. Experience enriches, identity confines. When identity dissolves, experience flows freely. You begin to notice a new relationship with choice, You no longer choose to avoid pain at all costs. You choose alignment even when it feels uncomfortable. Not because you are brave, but because discomfort no longer threatens your sense of self. The old narrative needed comfort to survive. The new presence does not. This does not make you reckless. It makes you honest. Honesty becomes your compass, and not brutal honesty, not performative honesty, but quiet, internal honesty about what is true in this moment. And truth, when honored consistently, creates a life that does not require repetition to teach its lessons. Living without the old narrative is not the end of the journey. It is the end of looping. From here, life unfolds forward, not in a straight line, but in a living one, with curves, pauses, surprises, and depth. You are no longer trying to escape the past or force the future. You are here, and here is enough. The cycle does not return, not because you are vigilant, but because vigilance is no longer needed. You are not repeating yourself, you are living. And that is the quiet miracle that remains when the old narrative finally falls silent. Chapter 19. The strange silence after the pattern breaks. After the cycle ends, there is a silence no one warns you about. It is not peaceful at first. It is not comforting. It does not feel like victory. It feels unfamiliar. So unfamiliar, in fact, that many mistake it for emptiness and rush to fill it. This is the strange silence that follows the breaking of a pattern. For as long as you can remember, there was always something pulling at you. A problem to solve, a tension to manage. A story running in the background explaining who you were and what you needed to do next. Even in moments of rest, the hum was there, quiet but constant. And then, suddenly, it isn't. The absence is startling. You wake up one morning and realize you are not bracing for anything. No immediate dread, no background anxiety, no familiar pressure nudging you toward the same old thoughts. Nothing is wrong. And yet, something feels off. This is where many people panic. They assume they have lost motivation, lost purpose, lost their edge. They begin searching for the familiar discomfort, almost hoping it will return, because at least it told them who they were. This is the paradox of liberation. The pattern provided orientation. Even pain, when repeated, gives shape to time. It tells you where you are, what to expect, how to prepare. When the pattern breaks, that orientation disappears. You are no longer being pulled forward by habit or pushed back by fear. You are simply here. In ancient texts, this phase was described as the wide field, a place initiates entered after completing a trial where no instruction was given and no challenge appeared. Many begged to be sent back. They wanted something to overcome, something to prove, but the elders refused. "This field is not empty," they said. "You are." The strange silence is not the absence of life. It is the absence of compulsion. For the first time, you are not being driven by unresolved emotion, unexamined identity, or subconscious memory. The machinery that once powered your days has powered down. And now, you must learn how to live without it. This is harder than it sounds. Without the pattern, you may notice that you don't rush as much, that you don't overthink every interaction, that you don't replay conversations in your head searching for mistakes. But you may also notice something else. You don't know what to do with the extra space. The silence exposes how much of your life was spent responding rather than choosing. Choosing requires presence. Presence requires tolerance for uncertainty. The old pattern removed uncertainty by telling you who you were and what would happen next. Even if the outcome was unpleasant, it was predictable. Predictability is comforting to the nervous system. The silence offers no such script. It does not tell you what comes next. It does not reward you for vigilance. It does not give you a role to play. It simply waits. A man named Dorian described this phase as standing in a room where the music stopped. For years, his life revolved around ambition and pressure. When that cycle ended, he expected relief. Instead, he felt disoriented. "I don't know how to measure myself anymore," he said. That was the point. The strange silence removes metrics. You are no longer measuring yourself against progress, struggle, or survival. You are no longer defining your worth by how much you endure or achieve. You are no longer narrating your life as a problem to solve. This can feel like loss, but it is the loss of noise, not meaning. Meaning does not shout, it emerges. In the silence, you begin to notice subtleties you missed before, the way your body relaxes when you speak truthfully, the way certain environments feel nourishing while others feel draining, the way your energy responds to different people without explanation. You are learning a new language, a quieter one. This is why the silence feels strange. It does not demand attention, it invites attunement. Most people have never lived this way. They are accustomed to being pulled by desire or pushed by fear. When neither is present, they mistake stillness for stagnation. But stagnation feels heavy. This silence feels light. It has space in it. The danger here is premature filling. When the old pattern breaks, the mind rushes to install a new one, a new goal, a new obsession, a new identity. Anything to avoid the vulnerability of not knowing. But if you rush, you risk rebuilding the same cycle in a different costume. The silence is not meant to be filled immediately. It is meant to be listened to. In the silence, your nervous system recalibrates. It learns that nothing bad happens when there is no urgency. It learns that rest does not lead to collapse. It learns that presence is safe. This learning cannot be rushed. The silence is the integration phase. Everything you have uncovered about identity, resistance, memory, choice settles here. The body catches up to awareness. The system reorganizes itself without instruction. This is why you may feel tired without reason, or reflective, or emotionally neutral. These are signs of deep internal adjustment. Do not mistake neutrality for numbness. Numbness disconnects. Neutrality opens. Neutrality allows you to respond freshly instead of reflexively. In this space, you may find yourself doing less but feeling more alive, speaking less but being more honest, planning less but moving more precisely. This is not regression. It is refinement. The silence teaches you something essential. You do not need tension to be motivated. You do not need fear to be responsible. You do not need pain to be meaningful. These were beliefs inherited from the cycle. Without them, life becomes simpler, but not smaller. In fact, it becomes more vivid. You begin to notice moments that once passed unnoticed. A conversation that feels complete. A task done without strain. A decision made without second-guessing. These moments do not announce themselves as milestones, but they are. They mark the emergence of a life not driven by repetition. The strange silence does not last forever, but it must be respected while it is here. If you allow it, if you do not rush to replace it with noise, it becomes fertile ground. New desires emerge, not from lack, but from curiosity. New directions appear, not from pressure, but from resonance. You begin to want things differently, not because you are escaping something, but because you are drawn toward something. This is how forward motion returns, organically, gently, without force. The silence teaches you to listen before acting. And listening reveals something surprising. You were never empty, you were simply crowded. Crowded with old stories, old fears, old roles that no longer applied. Now that they are gone, there is room. Room for choice, room for joy, room for a future that does not need to repeat itself to be understood. The strange silence after the pattern breaks is not an ending. It is the first true beginning. But unlike false beginnings, this one does not rush you. It waits until you are ready to move, not out of habit, but out of alignment. And when you do move again, you will notice something remarkable. You are no longer being pushed by the past. You are being pulled by the present. That is how you know the cycle is truly over. Chapter 20. Time begins responding to you. There is a moment after the silence settles when something subtle but unmistakable changes. Time begins to respond. Not dramatically, not all at once, but with a quiet intelligence that feels almost personal. You notice it first in small ways. Things take less effort. Conversations flow without rehearsal. Decisions arrive without pressure. You are no longer chasing moments. Moments begin finding you. This is not luck. It is alignment revealing itself through time. Before, time felt like something you were running out of, or running against, or trying to manage. You measured it obsessively, worrying about wasted years, missed opportunities, delayed progress. Time felt like a judge, a deadline, a threat. Now it feels different. Time feels cooperative. This is what happens when the cycle ends. Time was never your enemy. It was responding to who you were being. When identity was rigid, time looped. When emotion was rehearsed, time repeated. When resistance dominated, time slowed and thickened. But when identity loosened and presence took its place, time recalibrated. Time does not move independently of consciousness. It moves with it. In ancient philosophies, time was described not as a straight line, but as a field, one that bends around attention and intention. When attention is fragmented, time fractures. When intention is conflicted, time stalls. When consciousness is coherent, time flows. This is why your days now feel different. Not longer, not shorter, just fuller. You begin to notice that the right conversation happens at the right moment. That you think of someone just before they reach out. That opportunities appear without force, often in ways you could not have planned. This is not magic. It is the removal of interference. The old cycle created static. It pulled your attention backward and forward, away from the present. That static, distorted timing. You arrived too early or too late. You pushed when waiting was needed. You waited when movement was required. Now, without the old narrative, you are here when things happen, and being here is everything. A woman named Irena described it this way: "It feels like I stopped missing my own life." Before, she was always preparing for what came next, or recovering from what had already passed. When the cycle ended, she found herself fully inside moments, listening without distraction, choosing without regret, acting without second-guessing. Life met her halfway. This is how time responds when you are no longer divided. Division creates delay, wholeness creates synchrony. You are not controlling time now, you are cooperating with it. This cooperation does not make life effortless, but it makes effort effective. When you act, your actions land. When you rest, rest restores. When you speak, your words carry weight. Nothing leaks. This is one of the clearest signs that the cycle is over. Energy stops leaking. Before, so much of your energy was spent managing inner conflict, arguing with yourself, resisting feelings, justifying choices, replaying the past, anticipating the future. That conflict consumed time and distorted momentum. Now that energy is available for attention, for creativity, for discernment. You are not doing more, you are doing cleaner. Time responds to clarity by simplifying. Paths that once felt convoluted straighten. Choices that once felt overwhelming narrow naturally. You do not need to evaluate every option, only the ones that resonate. Resonance replaces strategy. This can feel unsettling if you are used to planning your way forward. You may worry that you are being passive or unambitious, but what is actually happening is more refined than ambition. You are no longer forcing outcomes, you are allowing sequence. Sequence is not randomness, it is order revealed through timing. When time responds to you, you notice that delays feel purposeful instead of frustrating. Pauses feel instructive instead of punishing. You trust that movement will resume when it needs to, and you are rarely wrong. This trust is not blind, it is earned. You earned it by staying present through silence, by not rushing to rebuild identity, by allowing the cycle to fully dissolve rather than partially repair itself. Time recognizes this maturity. In old teachings, it was said that time bends toward those who no longer argue with it, not because they surrender their agency, but because they stop wasting energy, resisting reality as it unfolds. You are no longer asking, "Why is this happening?" You are asking, "What is this showing me?" That shift alone changes everything. When something unexpected occurs, you do not immediately interpret it as setback or threat. You stay curious. You listen. You allow meaning to emerge instead of assigning it prematurely. This patience creates precision, and precision is magnetic. People sense it in you. They notice that you are less reactive, more grounded, more present. Conversations deepen, opportunities become more direct. You are no longer overlooked or overextended, you are felt. Time responds not only through events, but through people. The right people appear at the right moment, not because you were searching, but because you were receptive. Relationships no longer repeat the same dynamics. Old patterns fail to reattach. This is not coincidence. Old patterns require old timing. Without urgency, fear, or identity-based motivation, those patterns cannot synchronize with you. You are out of phase with them. This is why some relationships fade naturally after the cycle ends. There is no conflict, no drama, just a gentle loss of relevance. You are no longer speaking the same internal language, and that is okay. Time is reorganizing your world around who you are now. This reorganization may look quiet on the surface. You may not see dramatic shifts immediately, but beneath the surface, alignment is happening continuously. Think of a river after ice melts. The water does not rush immediately. It adjusts its course, it clears debris, it finds new channels. Then, without warning, it moves powerfully and freely. You are in that phase. Time is clearing channels. This is why forcing anything now feels wrong. Your intuition becomes sharper, not because you are trying to listen, but because there is less noise. The signal is clear. You know when to act. You know when to wait. You know when to say yes. You know when to walk away. This knowing is calm. It does not argue. And because it does not argue, time trusts it. Time responds to trust with cooperation. The future no longer feels like a place you must reach. It feels like something that is arriving naturally, step by step, in rhythm with your readiness. You stop asking, "Am I on the right path?" Because the path responds when you walk it. Mistakes still happen, but they no longer spiral into self-judgment or regression. They become information, not identity. You adjust, you continue. Time does not punish you for missteps, it adapts with you. This adaptability is the greatest gift of a life without cycles. You are no longer repeating lessons. You are integrating them in real time. The year does not loop, it unfolds. You may still face challenges, still experience uncertainty, still encounter change. But these experiences no longer feel like traps. They feel like movement, movement with direction. Time begins responding to you because you are no longer resisting it, rushing it, or demanding guarantees from it. You meet it as it is. And time, in return, meets you where you are. This is the partnership that replaces the cycle. Not mastery over time, not surrender to time, but collaboration. You move. Time moves with you. And for the first time, the future does not feel like something you must survive. It feels like something you are walking into, awake, present, and unburdened. That is how you know the cycle is truly complete. Time is no longer teaching you through repetition. It is responding to you through flow. Chapter 21. The year that finally moves forward. There is a quiet morning that arrives without announcement. No fireworks, no declaration, no sudden certainty that everything has changed. You wake up and nothing feels extraordinary until you realize something subtle has shifted. The year is no longer circling, it is moving. At first you doubt it. You have been here before, or so you think. You have felt momentum rise and fall. You have felt hope return only to dissolve. You have learned not to trust early signs. Caution feels wise. But this is different. There is no rush in it. The year that finally moves forward does not pull you ahead by urgency. It does not demand acceleration. It does not ask you to prove anything. It simply unfolds step by step without dragging you back to where you've already been. You notice it in the absence of déjà vu. Situations arise that once would have triggered old reactions, and they don't. Conversations take turns you didn't anticipate, not because you planned them, but because you are present enough to respond honestly. Choices appear without the familiar pressure to decide quickly or perfectly. You are not trying to escape the past anymore, and because of that, the past stops chasing you. This is how forward motion feels when it is real, not exhilarating and not dramatic, stable. In ancient traditions, there was a belief that time only moves forward for those who stop dragging unfinished selves behind them. Until then, time loops, not to punish, but to complete. Once completion occurs, repetition is no longer required. The year that finally moves forward is not a reward, it is a consequence of no longer rehearsing who you were. This year feels different because you are not measuring it against previous ones. You are not asking, is this better than before? You are not scanning for evidence that change will last. You are too busy living. The forward-moving year does not arrive with a sense of arrival. There is no finish line crossed, no moment where you say, now I've made it. Instead, there is continuity. One day leads naturally to the next. Effort feels proportional to outcome. Rest actually restores. Action lands. Nothing leaks the way it used to. You are not carrying the same emotional weight from day to day. Yesterday does not sit heavily on today. Tomorrow does not loom like a threat. Time feels usable. This is one of the clearest signs that the cycle has ended. When time becomes a medium instead of a pressure. A man named Elias once described this year as the first year I didn't need to survive. For most of his life, each year had been a test of endurance, resilience, or discipline. Even good years carried an undertone of strain. This year did not. Not because nothing went wrong, but because wrongness no longer defined the experience. Challenges still appeared, but they did not collapse him inward. They did not reactivate old identities. They did not drag him back into self-negotiation. They were met, then resolved, then released. This is the rhythm of a year that moves forward. Events come and go without sticking. Lessons are learned once. Emotions pass through instead of settling in. The nervous system does not brace for repetition. You trust yourself to adapt. That trust is new. Before, trust may have been something you aspired to, something you tried to cultivate. Now, it is simply present because you have evidence. You have lived through moments where you did not betray yourself. You have stayed aligned without force. You have allowed silence without panic. Trust grows from memory that has been updated. The body knows the past no longer controls the present. This is why the forward-moving year feels grounded. You are not reinventing yourself every few months. You are not constantly adjusting your identity. You are not trying to stay on track. There is no track. There is movement. This movement does not feel linear. Some days are quiet, some are active, some feel expansive, others feel reflective, but none feel stuck. Even pauses feel intentional. This is important. In the past, pauses felt dangerous. They triggered fear of stagnation, failure, or loss of momentum. Now, pauses feel like part of the motion itself. You no longer rush to fill space. Space is no longer the enemy. The year that moves forward contains space. Space to think without overthinking. Space to feel without drowning. Space to decide without pressure. And in that space, life has room to meet you. Opportunities appear not as interruptions, but as continuations. They do not pull you off course. They extend the direction you are already moving in. This is because the direction is no longer imposed. It emerges. You are not chasing meaning anymore. Meaning reveals itself through participation. You are not asking life to prove itself to you. You are engaging with it directly. This engagement is calm. You may notice that others respond differently to you now, not because you are trying to influence them, but because you are no longer performing. People sense when someone is not negotiating their presence. Conversations deepen or end quickly without confusion. Dynamics clarify themselves. You stop investing energy in situations that do not respond, not out of judgment, out of resonance. This saves time. Time that once leaked into cycles now consolidates into direction. The year moves forward because energy moves forward. This is the practical miracle. Nothing mystical is required, no special belief, no constant vigilance, just coherence. When your actions, emotions, and identity are no longer in conflict, time stops looping. It does not need to repeat lessons. It does not need to create friction to get your attention. You are already listening. This is why the year that moves forward feels quieter than expected. There is less drama, less internal commentary, less urgency. But there is also less regret. You do not look back constantly. You do not fantasize about alternative paths. You do not replay decisions wondering if you chose wrong. You chose honestly, and honesty stabilizes time. As the year progresses, you may notice that milestones feel less significant. Birthdays, anniversaries, achievements, even setbacks. They still matter, but they do not define you. They are moments, not markers of worth. This is a profound shift. The cycle thrived on turning moments into identities. One failure became who you were. One success became pressure to maintain. One loss became expectation. The forward-moving year does not do this. It allows moments to remain moments. And because of that, the year does not collapse into itself. It stretches. You begin to sense a future that does not feel heavy with expectation. You are not planning 5 years ahead to escape the present. You are not clinging to routines to stabilize fear. You are participating. This participation is the true sign that time has begun responding to you. You are no longer being carried by habit. You are walking, not aggressively, not cautiously, intentionally. The year that finally moves forward does not promise that everything will work out. It promises something more valuable. That whatever happens, you will not be dragged backward by it. You will not lose yourself to repetition. You have already left that territory, and because you have left it, not dramatically, not defiantly, but completely, time respects the boundary. It does not cross it again. The year moves forward because there is nothing pulling it back. You are not repeating yourself. You are not rehearsing the past. You are not preparing for disaster. You are living in sequence, one moment responding to the next. This is what it means to move forward, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. The year that finally moves forward is not the best year of your life. It is the first honest one, and honesty, once established, does not reverse. It continues quietly, steadily forward. Chapter 22. The Choice That Can't Be Unseen. There is a moment that does not feel like an ending. It feels like recognition, not sudden, not dramatic, not loud. It feels like seeing something so clearly that pretending otherwise becomes impossible. This is the final threshold. Not because it closes a chapter, but because it removes the option of returning to ignorance. Once this choice is seen, it cannot be unseen. Throughout your life, you believed you were choosing between outcomes: success or failure, staying or leaving, trying or giving up. You believed choice lived on the surface of action. But the deeper choice was always happening elsewhere. It was the choice between awareness and avoidance. Every cycle persisted because avoidance was easier, not morally easier, emotionally easier. Avoidance softened discomfort. Awareness demanded presence, and presence exposed truth. Now that truth stands fully revealed. You see the mechanics of repetition. You recognize the cost of familiarity. You understand how identity, memory, and emotion once conspired to keep you circling. And with that understanding comes an irreversible shift. You can no longer honestly say, "I didn't know." This is not a burden. It is freedom. Because from this moment on, repetition is no longer accidental. It becomes a decision. This is the choice that can't be unseen. Before, when you returned to old patterns, there was confusion. You told yourself you were trying, that circumstances were complicated, that timing was wrong, that you would do better next time. Those explanations worked because you believed them. Now they do not. Now, when the familiar temptation appears, the urge to abandon yourself, to override your truth, to trade alignment for comfort, you see it clearly for what it is. A choice, not a flaw, not a failure, not fate, a choice. This awareness changes everything. It removes shame, it removes drama, it removes excuses. You are no longer fighting yourself, you are deciding. This decision is not made once. It is made moment by moment, but it is no longer made blindly. In ancient traditions, this was called the crossing of the eyes, the moment when the initiate could no longer see the world the same way again. The old illusions still existed, but they were transparent. They could be entered, but never unknowingly. This is why some people feel a quiet grief at this stage. They realize how many years were lived unconsciously, how many choices were made in fear, how much time was spent negotiating with versions of themselves that no longer exist. This grief is natural. It is not regret. It is respect for the life you lived before awareness arrived. You survived long enough to see clearly. That matters. The choice that can't be unseen is not about perfection. You will still make mistakes. You will still hesitate. You will still feel the pull of familiarity from time to time. But you will not confuse that pull with truth. You will not mistake comfort for alignment. You will not mistake fear for wisdom. You will not mistake repetition for destiny. And because of this, the cycle cannot quietly rebuild itself. It would require your cooperation. This is the power of seeing. Seeing does not force you to change. It removes your ability to lie to yourself about why you don't. That is enough. From here, your life becomes simpler, not easier, but cleaner. Decisions clarify. Relationships either align or fade. Time continues to respond, not because you are doing everything right, but because you are no longer divided. You stop asking life to prove itself to you. You meet it directly. The universe does not demand certainty from you. It only asks for coherence. When your inner knowing and outer actions are no longer at odds, Reality has no friction to work against. This coherence is quiet. You will not announce it, you will not defend it, you will not seek validation for it. You will simply live it, and living it changes everything without needing to convince anyone. The final choice is not about choosing a path. It is about choosing presence over pretense, choosing to stay awake when it would be easier to drift, choosing to remain honest when it would be simpler to rationalize, choosing to feel what is true rather than what is familiar. Once you see this choice clearly, you realize something profound. The universe was never testing you, it was responding to you. Every repetition was an echo, every delay a reflection, every cycle a mirror, not to judge, but to reveal. Now that you see yourself clearly, the mirror no longer needs to repeat the image. It can change. And it does, not because you demanded it, but because you are no longer pretending you don't see. This is the end of the script you lived unconsciously, not the end of your life, the beginning of authorship. From here, there is no grand promise, no guarantee of ease, no assurance that everything will unfold perfectly. There is something better. Honesty. Honesty with yourself about what you are choosing in each moment. And honesty, once embraced, cannot be reversed. It does not allow you to go back to sleep, and it does not allow you to blame time, fate, or circumstance. It simply asks, again and again, are you here? When the answer is yes, the cycle stays broken, not because you are vigilant, but because you are awake. And once awake, repetition no longer teaches you anything new, so it releases you, quietly, completely. And the life that remains is not extraordinary, it is real. And real life, lived consciously, does not repeat itself to be understood. It unfolds, one honest moment at a time,